In the history of the 20th century music, there are concerts and then there are coronations. Few events have ever carried the sheer cultural magnitude of what happened on a humid weekend in June of 1972. It was the moment the king of rock and roll finally arrived at the center of the world, Madison Square Garden. Welcome back to Elvis Presley Moments, where we explore the stories and the soul behind the greatest moments in entertainment history. Today, we're looking at the weekend a Southern icon faced his biggest fear in the heart of New York City. The statistics alone were staggering. 4 shows, 80,000 tickets sold. The box office closed almost instantly, leaving the entire city scrambling for a glimpse of the man who had invented modern celebrity. When he stepped onto that stage, bathed in flashbulbs, he looked like a god, untouchable, confident, wrapped in white rhinestones. But behind the curtain, the truth was very different. Elvis Presley was terrified. To understand why this weekend mattered, you have to understand the moment. This was 1972. New York City was not the tourist-friendly hub it is today. It was gritty, dangerous, and cynical. It was the hardest room in the world to play. By 1972, Elvis was the highest-paid entertainer on the planet. Yet for 15 years, he had deliberately circled around New York City like a fortress he could not breach. He had not played a proper concert in the Big Apple since the 1950s. His insecurity was deep-rooted. In his mind, New York was the home of the critics who hated him, the intellectual capital that worshipped Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones. Elvis worried that to the sophisticated elite, he was just a square, a nostalgia act who did not belong in the same city as the emerging hip-hop scene in the Bronx or the jazz clubs of Harlem. But his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, knew the brutal truth. You could not be the king of the world if you did not conquer the biggest city on earth. The battle began before a single note was sung. On June 9th, Elvis walked into the Mercury Ballroom at the New York Hilton to face the firing squad, the notoriously ruthless New York press corps. Elvis entered dressed to kill in a powder blue suit and massive championship belt. The reporters were ready to tear him apart, but he disarmed them completely. He was not defensive or arrogant. He was humble, quick-witted, and undeniably charming. When asked about his image, he simply smiled and said, "The image is one thing and the human being is another." In that moment, the tension evaporated. By the time he left for the Garden, the press was not sharpening their knives anymore. They were buying tickets. Then came Friday night. The atmosphere inside the Garden was electric. But to understand the power of that night, you have to look at who had his back. Elvis was not entering with a stiff pop band. He was bringing the heavy, sanctified sound of the South to Midtown Manhattan. Backing him were the Sweet Inspirations, the legendary all-female soul group led by Cissy Houston, Whitney Houston's mother. These were the women who grew up in the church, who understood that true music is not about perfection, it's about spirit. When they hit the stage, they laid the foundation, bringing the gospel grit that gave the king his crown. It was that fusion, the white boy from Mississippi channeled through the soul of Memphis R&B, that New York was not ready for. But the magic was not just in the setlist, it was in the synergy. Watch the footage closely. During the breakdown of songs like Suspicious Minds, Elvis would often turn his back to the crowd and lock eyes with Cissy and the Inspirations. It was a call and response rooted deeply in the black church. They pushed him. If he went high, they went higher. If he growled, they testified. Critics at the time noted that while Elvis was the face on the poster, the spiritual engine of that show was the line of women behind him. They forced him to sing harder than he ever had in Hollywood, turning Madison Square Garden into a revival tent. Looking up from the stands were the very people Elvis feared would judge him. The VIP section was a who's who of music legends, including John Lennon, George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and David Bowie. They had come to pay their respects to the architect, to see if the man who had borrowed so heavily from rhythm and blues still had the fire. When the house lights went down and the opening drum roll tore through the speakers, the reaction was a physical force. Witnesses described the scene as a lightning storm indoors. The constant popping of thousands of flashbulbs created a blinding strobe effect. The scream of 80,000 people shook the floorboards. Elvis stepped out wearing the white Adonis jumpsuit, a masterpiece of embroidery featuring a heavy-lined cape. The New York Times would famously write the next morning that he looked like a prince from another planet, describing his high Indian cheekbones and smooth brown skin. He looked less like a 50s crooner and more like a superhero. He attacked the performance with the physicality of a prize fighter. He was a ball of nervous energy, exploding into karate kicks and deep lunges. He tore through That's All Right and Proud Mary at breakneck speed. During Poke Salad Annie, a swamp rock classic, he dropped into deep squats that would have destroyed the knees of a younger man, driving the rhythm with his entire body. During Suspicious Minds, he was a blur of motion, commanding the stage with the confidence of a gladiator. But it was not just the speed, it was the soul. During An American Trilogy, he stood motionless while the flute solo played, holding 20,000 people in complete silence before the crescendo blew the roof off. By the time he reached the finale, the fear was gone. New York did not just accept him, they surrendered to him. While the miracle happened on stage, RCA Records pulled off a massive hustle. To beat bootleggers recording the show, they parked a mobile truck outside, mixed the tapes overnight, and rushed the official vinyl to stores in just 8 days, flooding the streets before the black market could compete. When the final curtain fell, Elvis did not stay to party. He simply got on his plane and flew to the next city. But he left something behind that would last forever. The Madison Square Garden shows are now considered the absolute peak of his 1970s career. It was the weekend the hillbilly cat walked into the lion's den of New York City and walked out a king. Decades later, when historians look back at Elvis Presley, they point to 1972 at Madison Square Garden as the victory. It was the last time the world saw him truly untouchable, flanked by the sweet inspirations, standing at the center of the universe with the world at his feet. He came to New York a star. He left as an immortal. Thanks for watching this deep dive on Elvis Presley moments. If you enjoyed this look at music history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the legends who shaped our culture. We'll see you in the next one.